Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight's guest is an AudioFile magazine Earphones Award-winning narrator. She's also an accomplished singer, songwriter, and voice actress. Her voice can be heard on national and international TV and radio commercials, as well as in several animated series and video games. That's right, it's your favorite narrator and mine, Brittany Pressley. Brittany, how the heck are
Ooh,
you?
good. How are you?
Good. And that was the bio that's on Penguin Random House,
Yeah, it's condensed. It's fine. We
more
have
or
to run that
less.
audio award winning now. We've got that at that
Oh,
extra
that's
credit on.
right. Is that was that for Local Woman Missing?
Um, yeah, so I've won that one, and then there was before that I did a YA book that won.
Which
What
YA
it
book?
was called See You in the Cosmos.
Okay,
That
because I'm
would have
actually
been
listening to a YA
great.
book that you narrated now. Name's escaping me. It's the one about addiction.
Oh,
Heroin.
that's a good one.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. So anyway, how are you?
I'm good. I'm good. Just frazzled, staying busy.
Yeah. So there are so you narrated my second Avery Bishop novel, One Year Gone, and I always use this as a reference in terms of just really the importance of narrators. When I was talking to a narrator when I started earlier this year, kind of like chatting with narrators, I always talk about, you guys, and I'm sure you know this, that like you have fans, right? Like people sometimes will just look for books that you narrate, which is great. It's
Yeah,
incredible.
yeah.
Because When You're Gone, the very first Audible, and I had to like dig around because it's been several years now. Geez, the very first Audible review. Fortunately, it was a five-star review. It says, I was super reluctant to try this book because there wasn't any reviews yet, and it had just come out. Brittany Presley is one of my favorite. Now, she did misspell your name, but that's okay. Brittany Presley is one of my favorite narrators, so I gave it a shot. I struggled to stop listening to this book. I love this book, and I was sad it ended. There's a twist at the end that I never saw coming, several exclamation points. So I was like, great.
There you
Because
go. You
I'm going to be
picked.
honest with you, just before we get to you, a little bit about the Avery Bishop book. So,
Yeah.
I it's probably, I mean, it's been several years now. You've probably narrated like 200 books since then, so I'm sure you don't remember. But it's not a very straightforward book for people who have not listened or read it. It basically has like three timelines that are just ongoing. Like I mean, out of all my books, it was probably one of the harder ones to write, just because it was just the way it was laid out in terms of, because like we're jumping all over in time, but I wanted to also move well and make sense. And I don't know. I think like when I was done, like I'm a huge audiobook fan, so I always take that stuff into consideration, especially with projects and who would be a great narrator. And I don't know, just in retrospect, I remember maybe just being kind of checked out by the time I turned it in and it was done, because I remember at some point the producer emailed me and said, so I'm thinking Brittany Presley for this project. What are you thinking? And I guess he sent like like one of your the audition for like the first chapter, and I listened to like a minute or two of it, and I was like, great, let's go. Let's go with it. Uh,
No.
just because like I don't know, like I'm very weird about, like, as much as I love audiobooks, I don't like to listen to my own stuff. Not because I don't
Yeah.
enjoy the narrators, it's because then I start hearing things in sentences or whatever where I wish, like, I wish I
Right.
had changed that, or whatever else.
Yeah.
Well, which is to say, I was very happy that, you were the narrator of that. So thank you so much for doing an amazing job with that. And then, so yes, since then you've done, how many audiobooks have you narrated now, here in 2025?
So Audible says over 700. I think that's
Oh,
not correct, but it could be. But I mean, it's close to that because there's definitely some like double and triple book, like sometimes you'll see a book listed like three or times because there's like the Australian version and or there's like multiple imprints of a certain thing. So there's definitely some repeats, but I mean, I think it might be like six. I don't know. It might be 700.
so did you try to, and we're going to get into, I guess, how you got started, but I'm just curious right now, did you, like, at the beginning, did you try to keep track? I've talked to some narrators who will, kind of keep a spreadsheet at first, but eventually, after so long, it's very hard to keep up with all that.
Um, no, I mean, I think. those first, like that first couple of years, it was kind of like, you're checking and it was like, oh, cool, I've hit 25 or I've hit 50 or, that kind of thing. I, when I started, probably a year or so after I started, I did, Audible used to have this thing that was like called the 13-week contract. I don't know why I'm putting in quotes, the 13-week contract. And it was like you just got a slew of books and you were contracted to either do 15 hours of audio a week or 10 hours of audio a week.
Hmm.
And it was for 13 weeks straight. And so it was kind of like one of these things where, it was just a lot. Like, you would really go because it wasn't like book by book or project by project. It was the amount of hours. So there'd be times where, maybe at Wednesday at 12:45 I finished a book, but it wasn't like I was like, okay, well, I'm finished for the day. I'd be like, all right, well, I guess I gotta start the next one right away, because I owed them 15 hours of audio every week. So that by when I first did that contract, like, I got a lot kind of quickly. Um, and
How
that
do
like
they st I mean, how long was that occurring? Because that sounds kind of crazy.
it was pretty crazy. That was 2013. Yeah,
Okay.
2013.
Was that
Um,
when really audiobooks started blowing up and they just
it
really felt
was
they needed to do the crunch of trying to get as much out there as possible?
I think it was kind of linked to Amazon's acquisition of Audible.
Hmm.
And so it was like there was a lot of back catalog. Like I was doing a lot of older books that had never been done in audio before.
Right.
So it was a lot of back catalog stuff. But
Wow.
then, so you kind of have those like certain milestones. And also truly, Audible also had like a pay tier. So like when you came in, you got paid a certain rate. And after you'd done a certain number of books, you got like, up the rank of like the tier of what like pay grade you were at. So like there was some incentive to be like, oh well, I've hit this, so now I get like the pay bump. I get to make a little bit more because now I've done 50 books, and then they stop
Yeah.
after 60, and everybody makes the same thing, and it doesn't matter anymore. But
Well, let's get into how you got started with audio narrating because I always find it fascinating that it feels like the majority of narrators have an acting background, but that's not always the case. And you've done a lot of like voiceover stuff. I mean, can you talk about how, like, when a young Brittany Pressley when she was in high school or college, like, what was the ultimate goal? Because I don't think a lot of people, grow up dreaming to become, a famous narrator,
sure.
audiobook narrator.
Um, I mean, the goal morphed and changed. I did start acting very young. I was like a child actor, so I lived in New York and did theater and commercials and all that kind of stuff. So I had that kind of like experience. But when I moved to the city, I was not actively pursuing that. I was doing dance and I was doing music and kind of pursuing that. And acting was kind of like always in the periphery. This thing that I had done, but wasn't. Sometimes I don't know. Sometimes I think because I wasn't as closely attached to it. I had a very like, oh, this is a fun thing I can do, but I wasn't sorry to anybody who's like pursuing acting and thinks that's the most flippant response ever. But I feel like it's kind of like dating. It's like sometimes it's like when you're not looking for someone, it's like easier to be yourself and stuff. So I felt less nervous in an acting sphere. And then I would say, so it was really kind of like my music background that got me into audiobooks because I was dating an engineer, an audio engineer at the time, and truthfully, I was trying to encourage him to get a job engineering audiobooks because a friend of ours, brother, worked for a publisher, and I was like, "Hey, this is a job you could like be an audiobook engineer." And he was never really that into it, and I was like, "Well, maybe I could narrate audiobooks, like if you're not going to use the contact, then I'll use it." And so I just kind of contacted him and was like, "Hey, I know you do this thing." And I think he was kind of humoring me, like he was being polite. I'd been to a Super Bowl party a couple of times. He knew me because I was the friend of his little brother. And so, but I sent in an audition for it was a book series by Allison Noel, who was like a YA writer at the time, and I got it. And here I am.
So, what year was this again? Do you remember?
That was 2011.
2011. Okay.
So a
Okay.
long time.
And then so since then, it's been, five, six, 700 audiobooks. We've kind of lost count, so we don't really know
Yeah.
exactly how
Yeah, it
many.
was
But
yeah, like the first few years it was definitely just something that it was not like my full-time gig. It was like a thing that I would do a couple times a year to, in between bartending and performing and doing all various and sundry, odd jobs here and there. And then I guess I did the contract for Audible in 2013, but it still didn't really fully like become like where I quit all my other side jobs was, I would say 2015 was when I was like, okay, this is what I do full time. I'm an audiobook narrator.
so in the bio it mentions the singer-songwriter. Is that something like where did that play into as well?
So that's what I was doing more like in between. I was kind of pursuing my own music career, but um, I really liked writing. I really liked being in the studio. I liked more like the work more so than the actual, not that I don't like performing, but that wasn't what was driving me. The way it does some people, they love to be like on stage, and that wasn't like it was kind of like a necessary end, but it wasn't the thing I loved the most. So I had gotten into doing like some session vocals. So it was like background singing for people or helping write songs for other people who were singers but weren't songwriters. So I did a bit of that and doing some like music for commercials. Um,
Yeah,
yeah.
I think people might not realize, but if you've not even like listened to a, Brittany Presley narrated an audiobook, you've probably heard her voice if you've watched any type of TV. I mean, how did the voiceover also come into play? Like, when did that start?
So that was probably pre-audiobooks a little bit. Again, from my act, I had a commercial agent. So I was kind of had like my foot in the door of that world. Um, so it was kind of simultaneously.
In my understanding, I was talking to Hillary Hubbard, and she had said that because she did a lot of that too, and she had said that like the landscape has really changed because I believe you still do a lot of voiceover work like that, like that it's not like how it was a decade or so ago where it
Yeah.
was, kind of a cash cow, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean the landscape has definitely changed. I mean, I did like two commercials when I was like 8 years old that like, it didn't like make me a super rich, but it like gave me a nice little nest egg when I graduated college. You know,
Wait, I'm sorry. How old were you?
eight.
So, okay, well, let's go back a little further real quick. Like, so when did you really start everything?
I did my first play at 5,
Wow.
but
Okay.
yeah, I moved to New York, or I started working in New York. I was kind of going back and forth. Yeah, the summer before the fourth grade.
And so so 8 years old, you get you're like what commercial? Do you remember this like the spot?
Yeah. I did uh I did some for Pebbles cereal, for
Like Fruity Pebbles?
Fruity Pebbles, for the calendar that
Oh,
came inside the Fruity Pebbles, and for Pediacare cold medicine, uh, Lysol basin tub and tile cleaner.
oh my goodness.
Uh,
That's a crazy. So, I mean, it's great to book any of those spots at any age, but to be
yeah,
in elementary school, I mean, like, did the kids in your school know? I mean, like, I'm sure they found out or something. And like,
yeah,
what was that like?
they did. It wasn't great, if I'm being honest. It was tough because I probably would have been happier had, like I said, I did go back and forth. It was a bit hard to like in New York. I kind of connected more with like the other kid actor types, but I wasn't here long enough to like consistently have those kinds of stable friendships. And then when I would go home, it was like, oh, I bet you think. And I was just talking about this with someone earlier today that I feel like there's some embedded things from childhood where, like, even as an adult, like, I have a real sense of, as ambitious as I am, I like I'm deeply paranoid of other people thinking that I think I'm good or that I think I'm in any way better than anyone because I feel like at 8, I was so like, oh, I bet you think you're better than us because you're on TV. And I was like, no, I don't. So I think that was probably the biggest thing is, just kids kind of are like, kids are mean. They think you have something cool. They want to make sure you feel like crap about it.
Yeah, but I mean, so still doing voiceover work after all this time. And I'm sorry, we got a little derailed there. I don't
Yeah.
know if you remember what we were talking about. I think it was about voiceover work. You were saying
Yeah,
something.
about commercials. Well, you were
Yeah.
saying that it's spoken with Hillary. So the biggest thing with the landscape of commercials changing, honestly, was just kind of like contracts and the union stuff. People are they're streaming, people are watching, mostly cable. There's not a lot of like network TV because the way you can make a lot of money was like it was called like Class A. And so like every time it's running on a CBS and NBC or whatever, that's when you would get those like really good residuals where you're like getting paid per run. Whereas if it runs on cable, like it's like a kind of a flat buyout.
Mm,
So, I mean, this is all very nitty gritty, but the bottom line is that it's it's still a nice payday, but I think the biggest difference probably from what Hillary was referring to is that there was a time where you could book one and be like good
mm.
or like comfortable. And now, in order to make what you used to make off one, you need to book 10. And booking 10 is very hard.
Yeah.
Like, it's just the numbers, it's just a numbers game. There's a lot of people that want to do it and not that many opportunities to do it. So it's just, it's very competitive. But
Yeah, absolutely.
still
So,
at it.
okay, so jumping back to the first audiobook what was it again? You said it was a YA? Um,
Yes. The author's name was Allison Noel and it was for Macmillan. It was called Faded.
Faded. Is that still available for people who want to like, dig around and find that very first thing?
Yeah, that very first thing. I don't know. Sometimes you hear your old stuff and you're like, oh, I kind of just want to like redo all of these now that I know what I'm doing.
So I would say, looking at when you look at your name on Audible and it shows you all the different titles, I mean, I'm primarily personally a fan of, thrillers, crime and stuff like that. And I see you do a lot of that. And I feel like that's something I don't know, correct me if I'm wrong, but I mean, do you enjoy that genre?
I love that genre. And it's funny because around the time I did your book, this industry has a tendency to be a bit like cyclical or there's like that phrase like work begets work. I feel like genre begets genre. Like you do more in one genre, you start to do more in it. Like there was a time where I was like, I remember getting my very first like kind of mystery thriller book, and I was like, oh, this is great. And then I got like a whole bunch more right after that. And whether that was because either the producing types were thinking of me that, or maybe I kind of have a theory that like people who write those types of books are also more likely to listen to those types of books, so therefore maybe they become more familiar. But yeah, it's kind of a bummer because I feel like I don't do as many as I would like to do now. I
I
think
feel like you do a
romance,
lot of them though.
the like
I mean,
rom, but the like
at least on the
rom-com
outside,
world,
it seems like you do
yeah.
a lot of them.
Yeah, I could do more. I feel like I do. The rom-com world has kind of superseded the mystery thing. And
Mm.
for a while, I felt like I was just like, oh, I'm rom-com girl, which is fun. But I think I remember one time also like emailing someone uh from Brilliance who I did your book for, and I had done like so many like sweet, cozy things, like just one after the other. And I was opening this mystery, and it was like, he's killing some woman. I mean, it was very grim, and I was like, oh, what a delight. This is refreshing.
So at what point, I mean, I'm assuming now you are at a place where you can be pickier with the titles that you choose or not. Or is that not the case? I mean, I know for people who don't know, obviously, like the book narration world, I mean, essentially it's work for a hire. So, you basically are just getting paid essentially, per book and a flat fee, blah blah blah. So it's not like you guys get royalties. And some of these books do incredible,
Yeah.
you know what I mean? And some books not so much. So oftentimes, publishers kind of eat that cost for the production and everything else. But regardless, I would like to think that like some narrators, I mean, starting out, again, it was whatever you guys could get. But I don't know, like, do you feel like at this point, like, do you get a lot of offers? You know what I mean? Do you get a little, like, are you able to be a little pickier in terms of, what the type of projects that you want to do?
I mean, kind of. It depends on, if I'm being really honest, like I feel like it depends And so I'm like, I don't know, what's your cost of living? I feel like I have a high cost of living. I need to work a lot. So that makes it
Yeah.
harder for me to feel like I can be super choosy because I need to stay busy. Um, but so you know, sometimes it's scheduling. You know, sometimes you can be choosy. For me, I feel like I'm choosy based on how busy I already am. Like, you know, if I've already got like a good healthy calendar of stuff, there are some times when something might come in where I'm kind of like, well, I really only have a few days empty in this particular month, so I'm not sure if I want to do that during, you know, because there might be something that I'm really excited about that like I want to make sure I have time for that. But in general, you know, you're pretty much it's only like if there's a particular like something that content wise, you know, there are certain like content things that I might just be like, I'm not really interested in doing that. But at this point, most folks know kind of what your yeses and your nos, or sometimes they'll, you know,
Yeah.
say like, hey, this, we got this, it's got this in it. Do you feel like you want to do that? And
Do
that's
you use a
more.
pen name for any of your narration? Because Will Dameron told me that apparently that's a thing with you narrators that
Yeah.
sometimes some narrators will use like pen names.
Yeah, I do have a pseudonym.
Oh,
Um, Incidentally, I feel like my pseudonym is still pretty tame. Like some people have pseudonyms because they're doing some really like raunchy stuff.
oh.
No shade, just whatever. Um, I don't really do any of that. It's just a personal thing. Again, not a prude, just not into it. But I still do have. For me, I had this pseudonym because when I first started, I was doing primarily young adult, middle grade, young stuff, and so I felt like I never, you know, in that those earlier years when I was having so many like kid style books, I thought like, well, it wouldn't be appropriate for me to have these like more adult romance books on here. So I had the pseudonym. But I don't do as much of that. I pretty much, you know, unless I'm requested. Like again, I think it's like a an author will have listened to something else that I've done under my pseudonym, so therefore they will ask for me as my pseudonym versus asking for
Can
my.
you say what your pseudonym is, or is that a secret?
It's not a secret. It's Brooke Bloomingdale.
And what type of books specifically are those?
They're romance books.
And how did you come up with that name?
The old classic. It's your middle name and the street you grew up on.
That's the old class. I feel like that's for something different, but okay.
I think it's a porn name,
Um,
but you know.
so all right,
Although
well let's talk
use
about
like their pets, and that's very funny.
when you like what type of prep goes into when you're doing an audiobook because it always fascinates me that you know obviously every narrator is a little bit different in terms of how they prep. Do you feel that you read the entire book or do you try to just get a sense of you know a good portion of the book? I mean like how much prep goes into and like has that changed over the years you know from when you did your very first audiobook to today?
It has changed. I think I'm just faster at it. And it kind of depends like book to book, and also like the level of like what's the word I'm looking for? Like collaborative help I have. You know, if I have a director that I'm working with, um, I have a little more leeway to kind of put my trust that they are going to catch any like late in the book landmines that could affect early. Um, I had a director one time I was working with, this was many years ago, and I was like, you know, I was talking to her and I was like, you know, I still have like 100 pages. I'm gonna try to stay up tonight. She was like, don't. She's like, don't worry about finishing it. She was like, I would rather you spend the time going back over the first 100 pages than trying to race through just to say you finished before we start tomorrow. She's like, I want you to be really familiar with what we're going to do tomorrow. And and that's kind of I've kind of kept that with me in terms of, like I said, feeling like I want to be really familiar with what I'm going to do the day I'm going to do it. And establishing like, you know, I always say like, I want the who, what, where, when, and why kind of a book, you know, like who are my main people? Where are we? What's the context? How old am I? What is my relationship to these other people? And then beyond that, other than just like, you know, if there's any like research, if there's any like foreign language things or those kinds of things that you might need to look up. But again, I don't like go crazy with looking a lot of that stuff up in advance, only because I know I'm not going to remember it. Like,
Yeah.
I know that like if it's a word I've never heard of, I will look it up, and then as soon as it comes time to say it again, I'm like, I looked this up, but I'm not confident. I like, it's like you don't trust that you remember what it was supposed to be, so I will find myself looking it up again anyways. Um, and then, I'm torn sometimes as it pertains specifically to like you, like a mystery or thriller. Sometimes I don't like to know how it ends. Like, I find that like again, short of any like major landmines that could like really affect, something that you need to know from later for as far as it pertains to like maybe a vocal characterization or something like that. But I don't know, like I kind of want to go on the journey, especially like if it's like a first person. Like I think it also if it's a first person and the first person perspective is not supposed to know what's going on, like kind of keeping that sense of discovery and mystery, I guess, kind of
Yeah.
I think impact and like I feel like playing it very sincerely. Like I don't know, I feel like sometimes if you know that this guy ends up being the bad guy in the end, it's almost like subconsciously you're like gonna color it with that in mind. Whereas to like play him really earnest and really innocent, and then you're like, oh my gosh, she was a bad guy all along.
That's
Uh,
fascinating.
yeah.
Actually, speaking of which, because I remember listening to it a long time ago, you did the one Patterson and David Ellison book, Invisible, right? Was that you?
Yeah, yeah.
Because that was one too where they had the kind of a twist where I think if you knew the ending, you might have done it differently, if I remember correctly. But so well, and if I remember correctly too, that was also a multi narrator, a multi voice audiobook, which I know have become much more popular nowadays. For people who don't know what I'm talking about, basically, it's just some audiobooks. It's so like with One Year Gone, the Avery Bishop book. We have again, it was like three different timelines. There's mostly two different point of views. There was the daughter, and then there was the mother, kind of present day, and then right after the daughter disappeared. And I remember actually, I think it had come up like, do we want to do two narrators? And it was like, like you could kind of go back and forth on that sometimes. And I think it was mostly just no, we just need a really, really strong, narrator to be able to play all these different things. But like when it comes to the multi-voice cast, like a Local Woman Missing, the one that had won the Audie for you. Well, actually, I guess it was for the author and the publisher, but I mean, you were obviously a huge, part of that. Like, I don't know, like, do you just read your sections, your chapters, or like again, do you want to kind of know what's going on with the other characters? Because sometimes it could be like four or five other narrators who are on these projects.
Right. Again, I think it depends on like how large of a contribution. There's some ones where you're barely in a couple of chapters and you don't interact with the other narrators at all, and
Yeah.
um, you are kind of just focused on what you're doing. But you want to have a sense of what's going on, and it's important to also. I'm gonna certainly read my sections more closely, but I'm always wanting to know like, okay, especially like as I get ready to record, like I feel like um I want to like kind of read through what just happened. Like what am I entering into? Sometimes they're completely disparate things and they don't overlap at all. But sometimes it really is a back and forth and the scene will go from two different POVs, but it's just ended. So I need to know like what just happened as I start my sections. So I want to read that and then just like collaborating and making sure you're talking to your co-narrators so that there's any voices or characters or that kind of thing that we can have some consistency throughout.
And you've done like those audio dramas too? You've done a few of
I've done
those?
a couple of those.
And then in those instances, are you basically just kind of by yourself or are you on a Zoom or even in a studio? Because I know that happens sometimes. Obviously, it costs much more to produce, but I mean like where you're actually having another narrator to kind of like play off of.
I have done a few of them, but you're right. They are rare because of the budgetary and scheduling constraints. Typically, when it's like a truly a full cast, when there really are a lot of people and it really is more of a proper audio drama, those are going to be in studio with everybody, and it's great. When it's what's becoming a little bit more popular is like what they call duet narration, which is
Mhm.
different than a dual POV, where it's, I'm reading all of the female characters and the male narrator's reading all the male characters. And again, typically it's not. I'm doing all that part, and like it's just like I pause when the male dialogue is, and then,
Yeah,
and
I'm
then I keep
not
someone
as
insert audio into
yeah.
that.
I would say as a listener, I'm not a huge fan of that. Because it just
That's
seems kind of, it's just sometimes it seems, I mean, I've only listened to a handful, but I mean, maybe the ones I listened to just were not well done, but it just seemed kind of jarring to have that one main narrator voice and then all of a sudden another voice kind of like, pipes up and then kind of goes away. And then it's just, I don't know. Because you could kind of tell too, it's like, yeah, it's just kind of sliced in there. It's not, or spliced in there. It's not necessarily like, again, they're having the actual whatever.
Yeah, that's how maybe I shouldn't name names here. But that's David
No, I
Baldacci
know the authors you're
books
talking
like that.
about.
So I've done
Yeah.
his books like that, and um I think the main issue with that is that, you know, what are you responding to? If we're not in the room doing this together, and, maybe I interpret the line to be like, "What are you, crazy?" And so then the response from the other person would be like, "No, you're crazy." But, sometimes it could be like, "What are you, crazy?" And then if the other person's like, "No, you're," like it doesn't, like
Yeah.
you're saying, like it doesn't match because they're not playing what I did to the other narrator so that they can respond in a way that makes sense for the scene. They're just kind of like randomly doing their lines wild and like hoping that it matches the emotion or intensity of the other person. So like I think it can, to your point, like as a listener, like sometimes it works out, and then I think it could also be like potentially jarring if it doesn't quite.
So when you're doing stuff like that, I mean, honestly, I think that really comes down to the producers too, when they're
Yeah.
doing, if there are responses from you or another narrator that's not really fitting, they should do, have you do pickups. I mean, how often are you doing? I mean, I'm assuming, every narrator does pickups. Do you find that over the years you're doing like fewer pickups? Like if you get to a place in a manuscript and you see like there's like a typo or there's that there's going to be an issue later on? Like, do you try to kind of anticipate that?
Like typos, if it's a very obvious typo. I mean, again, we try to like respect the author's work.
Because
And
yes, technically, I mean, you have to read whatever is in that manuscript word for word.
right. So it's very if it's very obvious, that it's definitely supposed to be a typo. We might fix that, and they'll put a note in and say, hey, and I'm not this part, I don't know the chain of command where it goes, if they let the author know, or if they if it hasn't been released yet in print, maybe they alert, because sometimes, we're getting these things before final print has gone through. Um, but if there's a lot of times where it's like me and the engineer were like, I mean, I can kind of see how I can make this work. If I take a pause here, I think I can make this make, like sometimes you're just kind of like finessing the sentence to try to like make the what maybe could be a typo, but it's like, but I could see a way that it can work. But then sometimes it's like an obvious typo.
Yeah.
Like I had a simple one today. Like here's a good example where it was like he'd um it was like a he'd and then a past tense. He'd showed up. He'd showed up.
Hmm.
And so as I came, I was like, that's weird, because and then I was like, well, because he'd is he had, so you wouldn't say he had showed up. You would either say he'd shown up or he showed up. So again, it was very small, but it was like, I think we should make this tweak. I think we should make that little minor tweak because I think it will sound more smooth, and you know, they're
Yeah.
like minor things, but you just want to
What,
like.
yeah. What about like pet peeves? Do you have any specific, I mean, having done so many books now, and I would just say for, as a listener of audiobooks, my pet peeve oftentimes, and usually I can tell it means that that author probably doesn't actually listen to audiobooks much, is when they have like just the overabundance of speech tags, where sometimes
Mm,
it just feels like, especially when it's just two characters talking and just like every line
yeah,
is he said, she said, he said, she said.
it's
Like, yeah, is there anything kind of sticks out to you that you might have, like, for any authors out there to be aware of, to like,
um
to kind of be aware of like when they're doing their own books?
that I mean that one is a big one. Again, I think I totally get it for the written, but those are those times where sometimes I wish we had permission to cut those because especially if I'm doing two character voices, it's like if I'm doing a male voice and a female voice and I'm going back and forth, it's like, well, they're gonna know because the voice is gonna match up to the sound. Um, but on close to that or related to that is there is nothing to me that takes the wind out of my sails more than ending a chapter or, heaven forbid, the whole book with an attribution. Like it's, a line of, I think ending with dialogue can be really nice, but it's like I'm always wishing it was, and it's just like a quick flip. Like instead of being like, I love you, don't, and I'll love you forever, he said. Like, I just wish it would be like, he looked at her and said, I'll love you forever. Like, to me, that's
Yeah.
such a better way of like, it feels like a sense of resolution. And when you throw on that, like, he said, like, I'm like, oh, that's not the last little moment you want to have. Something about it just always, that's one of mine.
Yeah.
Um, but I think you're right. I think you can definitely tell, um, that there are people who either talk through their books or are reading them out loud or are listening to audiobooks because I think that um, there are certain things where it's like, yeah, it's like it's not wrong, it's not bad, it's not anything, but it just certain something about it. And once it's in audio, like you hear, I think audio can highlight certain writing habits or writing, things that maybe that don't get flagged as much. But
Yeah. No, I mean,
and
I think it's important for writers to read your work aloud because I feel like good writing has a flow to it. It's almost like a song. It has a rhythm,
yes,
it has a flow. Even with like the dialogue, it doesn't have to necessarily be like Aaron Sorkin dialogue back and forth. But there's still just yeah, I mean, there's something kind of almost yeah, lyrical about just the way it should go. And then I feel like, and that's the thing too. I have this theory which I don't know if I want to, commit to quite yet because it kind of seems mean, but like, I feel like a good narrator can make a really bad audiobook like decent or a bad book like decent, where like, a great narrator can make a really bad book, good. Whereas there are some narrators out there, like I just personally am not a fan. I avoid them. Like if I see like, oh, so and so's narrating it, it's like, well, I'm just not going to listen to it just because I feel like in many ways there's something about it just kind of like makes a good book not so great, if that makes
yeah,
sense.
no, I mean, I agree. I think there is it's funny you said lyricism and musicality because I talk about that a lot in with audiobooks, also with commercial view. Like there's a music to the voice, and there's a music to certain emotions and the way certain things can come across. And even in the sentence structure, so even maybe not in the way it's said, but like, sometimes I'm working on something that um, where a book is written in a way it's very like statement oriented. It's very like this happened, this happened, this happened, it's almost like I did this, I did this, I did
Yeah.
this, I did this. And when you're reading it with your eyes, it would never, I don't think it would register. And it doesn't take away from the plot or the story or the experience, but there is just like a slightly more, like you said, like lyrical way of kind of connecting those ideas that makes it flow in just a way that like when you're saying it out loud, it just, I don't know, just kind of
Yeah.
flows better.
Yeah. I mean, well, what are your thoughts about, because just kind of on the same topic, and going back to that Avery Bishop novel, I remember using one particular run-on sentence when there was at this pep rally and we were inside of kind of like the character's head. And I think it was like almost like a good page long of just a run on. I mean, obviously, I think I had I'd made sure there was like some commas or whatever else. So there was a little bit where, you as a narrator could at least kind of catch your breath a little bit. But I mean, are there times too where you just, maybe a run-on is too long, where you're just like, oh, I cannot, there's no way I'm going to be able to do this, at least well.
Sure. I mean, like what you're talking about, like I feel like when it's like a device, when it's meant to obviously, when if it's meant to like,
Yeah, I mean, there was purpose to it. It wasn't like I
yeah,
had
like it's
no
supposed to,
idea what I was
no, no, no,
doing at
yeah,
the
when it's
time.
meant to be like a stream of conscious, like
Yeah.
kind of like we're really, um, and then, I mean, sometimes it's just like, I feel like, when I'm starting a new book, because that's the other thing. A lot of times when you're reading it, again, when you're prepping it, you don't notice these things, and it's not until you start to say it that you're like, oh, like it's more like I need to find this writer's flow so I can like learn how to modulate my own breathing. So like again with a really long sentence, um, it's just trying to find where am I going to breathe, and making sure that I put the breath in a place that is natural, not just because I'm like, I'm tired, it's like trying to find those natural stopping places. And also for the listener, there's sometimes you don't want to rush, you want to mind those pauses, those commas, all that stuff so that it allows the idea to settle in. If you just run straight through it, they might miss it. So it's like sometimes yeah, it's just finding that like the pacing of the sentence to make sure that the idea is coming across. And I don't know if this is what you're talking about or not, but like with other narrators, I think it's just also maybe some narrators who there's a lack of I'm not trying to disparage other people, um, but you know I think sometimes particularly maybe like newer narrators like get really too focused on like the elocution, like the way I'm saying the words and the
Yeah.
sound and the tone of my voice, but they're not really connected to what they're actually saying. So
No,
as a
I think there's a
listener, it goes
balance that
right
they
on
have
by.
to, yeah, there has to be a balance because I feel like some narrators sometimes, because it is a performance, you're not just reading, but you are kind of performing the audiobook in a way. But I feel like sometimes some narrators like kind of start to overperform. They kind of get too much into, and it kind of becomes, and it's just such a tricky job that you guys do because obviously I don't know. And again, I don't want to disparage any narrators, but sometimes it almost feels like the narrators are making it more about them than just kind of like, making sure the book and the characters are doing what they need to do. And so I guess, yeah, I mean, it is this weird like tightrope walk that you guys have to
Yeah.
do where you are performing it, but you're trying not to make the audiobook listener really aware that I guess they're listening to an audiobook, if that makes sense.
Yeah, I mean, again, I think it's like genre to genre and like
Yeah, well,
who
that's true
is
too.
your listener? Like who is your target listener? What are they looking to experience from this? So I think that I don't think there's like one way because I think stuff that works for me in a rom-com, I wouldn't do in a mystery thriller. I mean, like ultimately it's like the same, but there's little subtle variations. Or, third person versus first person. Like I still approach those fairly similar, like in that I want it to have a point of view. Like I think even third person, I'm not someone who really goes into the whole like third person is this like completely removed person who has nothing to do with the story. Like I, I don't, that's just not like my way or whatever.
Yeah.
But I think there are some things that lend itself to a bit more like conversational style read, where it's more just like, hey, I'm telling you a story and this is what's happening. I
Yeah.
think again, like like certain romance works that way, but with mystery, it's like you want to give it some mystery.
Yeah. You mentioned before about like when you're doing your research and prep about like languages. Do you speak any other languages?
Not fluently, no. I mean,
Okay.
I can get my way through French and Spanish and when I'm traveling, but I'm not fluent in any other languages, no.
Yeah. So, because I was just curious, because I think some books sometimes have, they'll have a character, of course they'll have maybe accents, but sometimes they'll actually have them speak certain stuff. And so, do you ever encounter, I mean, having done hundreds and hundreds of stuff, I'm sure you probably have, like, where an author is, or not, where the character is speaking a certain foreign language, like, I don't know, like what is that like in terms of like trying to really kind of nail that so that, somebody who does in fact speak that language doesn't like call you out later being like, we would never say it like that.
Yeah, I think that's when you really just tap into like your whole network of anybody you know. Does anyone speak this language? The hardest one I had a book that like, and usually the producer or whomever will flag something like that, a particular accent or a particular language prior to be like, hey, this is in this. Are you comfortable with this? But not always. I had one where it was a character needed to speak Malayalam, which is like a very specific Indian dialect from the region of South India and Kerala.
Wow.
And I got very lucky that someone I knew was dating a man who was from this region of India, and he was thrilled to be able to participate in this. So, I got pretty lucky with that. But yeah, sometimes you're just hoping that Google Translate is providing an accurate translation and giving you an accurate reference.
Yeah.
But even with that, there's some languages that I did a book also that had a bunch of Gaelic in it, and one of my best friends is Irish, and she gave me all the pronunciations. And then I had a proofer who was also Irish, and he came back and said it was all wrong. I was like, but she said it was right. He was like, well, I wouldn't say it that way. So it's
So,
like,
so how many hours do you like what is a typical day? Okay, say you get and I don't know, I mean, I don't know if you would agree with this. Sometimes I kind of feel like for every 10,000 words it's essentially an hour, kind of give or take. So like a 100,000 word novel can be about 10 hours give or take. Um like in a typical day, I mean, are you like what is your schedule typically like? Is it just like a Monday through Friday? Are you doing like 7 days a week? Like how many hours? I mean, like how long does it take you to get like a finished hour?
um, when I'm pressing record from pressing record to pressing stop, I can get an hour done in an hour and 15 to an hour and a half sometimes. I mean, the general, like, the way we schedule is like a 2 to 1. But for me, like, that's factoring in like stopping, going to the bathroom, like, the 2 to 1. But when I'm actually like, you know, yeah, I feel like I'm usually able to get 40, in 1 hour's time, I can get 45 minutes of audio recorded. Um, so, um, so my typical day is I'm usually scheduled, 10 to anywhere between 4 and 5, depending on the studio. Certain studios schedule till 5, building in for a longer lunch break, and others just do the stopping at 4. So I'm generally scheduled around that. And like this month, I'm working Monday through Friday because I'm just taking on a lot. Um, it's not my ideal. I don't love working on I don't love flipping between books. Sometimes it's a necessity because of scheduling, but I really try to stay in one story at a time. Um,
Yeah.
so that if it's or I try to have like a day in between. So let's say I'm doing a book that's like a 3-day book. I'm not necessarily gonna like take off the rest of the week, but I would try to put like maybe a day in between before starting the next thing, just so I can kind of like regroup. Um,
And then so like in between those, you would kind of fit in like auditions where like you're reading a chapter of a potential book that they've reached out to you, or maybe like a short story novella. I don't know, like if you ever squeeze those in, those have become popular, like 10, 20,000 word pieces as well.
yeah. Yeah. So like, depending on my schedule, and how long of a book is. And I do some stuff for like Apple News. I narrate news articles and some of that kind of stuff.
Now,
And there's
is this? I'm sorry, go
yeah.
ahead.
No, I was gonna say, and there's also, I mean, it doesn't always work out, but like if you've done a whole bunch, there is gonna be pickups. So like it's nice to be able to also like set some time aside to be able to get all your pickups done. The editors don't love that because they really want them right. They want them as soon as they send them to you. And I'm like, well, this
Right.
is up days in a couple of days. Can you wait? But
So is this like your home studio? Because I know a lot of narrators nowadays have their own home studios. Like when you mentioned about going to the studio, are you also still like going out and about now? Because I know like in the back in the day, not many people had their own home studios where it feels like,
Yeah.
I forget who I was talking to. I think it was Eduardo Ballerini said like kind of around COVID with shutdown, basically everybody, the narrators were kind of scrambling who did not already have their own home studios to kind of build their own home studios. So like how often are you like from home or like and how often are you just kind of going out to a studio?
I would say like over the year, it's probably 30/70. I try to keep it at that ratio. So 70% outside, 30% from home. But it doesn't necessarily, so like that's my year over, but I feel like there'll be times where like I have a lot of home stuff at one period of time and then I'll have be in studio a whole bunch. Kind of just depends on who I'm working for. Um, Even when I am at home, I do have a remote engineer working with me. I don't really record myself, which I know a lot of narrators do. And I did some in the beginning, but I just find that it's not efficient and not my preferred way of working. I don't
So
feel like I,
so what preference wise you like being in an actual like studio environment and not so much in the home studio?
yeah. And honestly, it comes down to sometimes, because if truthfully, again, sometimes it's just a budget thing. They'll be like, "Oh, can you do this from home with an engineer and a director instead of coming in?" Or like our studios are booked up. Can like we really need you to do this? Um, Honestly, it's just from like it's a comfort thing. Like I have a home studio, but it's
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 small,
very
small.
small.
Yeah.
I can't. I'm sitting in my chair. I can pretty much just sit in this one sort of position. I can't really like move or stretch or change or do anything like that. So and then, if my neighbor is vacuuming, then I have to kind of stop for that. I'm lucky that like, even though I live in New York City, I do my neighborhood's pretty quiet. So I don't have a ton of that kind of noise, but sirens, neighbors, someone's doing construction, all those kinds of things can be factors. But for me, honestly, it's just like my back hurts. If I'm in this little tiny thing for too many days in a row, my back hurts. I want to go somewhere where I can like the studios are just bigger and I can be more comfortable.
Yeah,
So
absolutely. So, do you still do any like songwriting, singing at all?
not as much as I would like,
Yeah.
truthfully. I feel very creatively fulfilled by this job, but I also feel very drained by this job. So, when I used to just be bartending and doing all my other things, then it was like I could get off of work and then also work on like creative projects, but it's like I feel like I don't have as much like creative juice left at the end of the day to like
Yeah.
do other artistic hobbies. So
What about like the animated series, like the voiceover work? What stuff have you done like I don't say cartoon, but like animated stuff
yeah.
for?
No, they're cartoons. So there's a couple of shows on Netflix. It's a lot of like dubbing kind of stuff. So I do like there's a Korean show that's called RoboCarpoli that's on Netflix. So
Okay.
it's originally a Korean show that is dubbed in English. And then there's another one called like, Winx Club, which is an Italian show that again, it's like I'm doing the English dub for that.
Okay, so it's mostly dubbing. It's mostly stuff that's already been. It's not like like you're a guest voice on like Bob's Burgers or something. You know what I mean?
Uh,
Like it's one of those things where it's like it's already in like. Are you having to? Because correct me if I'm wrong. Like most of those shows, the cast does the voices, and then later like the animators kind of whatever
mhm.
else, based on the scripts. Whereas you like it's already there.
It's
Like I
done.
mean, so when you're dubbing it, do you like try to dub it with the voice? You know what I mean? Like, are you watching and trying to like sync it up?
Yeah. So in fact, the company that I work for is called Three Beep, and it's because when you're dubbing, there are three beeps. You're watching it, you'll see the line before and it'll go beep, beep, beep. And then you have to come in, you have to time it so that you're coming in to match the flap. Um, I've done like I think we did one season of Winx where it was done what they call prelay, where yeah, we recorded it first and then they animated it to what we did. So that was kind of fun because we got to you had a little more freedom with what you were doing, whereas when you're doing the dub, you gotta match what it already kind of says.
Yeah.
Um, so
Do you have an idea sometimes when you're narrating a book? Because some of the books that you've narrated have, I mean, and it's the way it is with publishing. Like sometimes books take off, and they're not really sure why take off. Sometimes it's timing or whatever else. Like looking on Audible, some titles that you've done, like the listener rating, like it's like could be five, eight. 10,000, star things, and some could be like, a couple hundred or a thousand. Like, so clearly it's like the response from some readers. I mean, do you have an idea sometimes when you're doing a project that you think like, okay, this one could be really big? And sometimes when that happens, it doesn't necessarily, it doesn't take off. But I don't know, like sometimes, I don't know, like having done so many books now, do you just sometimes have an idea like, okay, there's something potentially special here that is going to really resonate?
Um, I mean, a lot of times you kind of get a sense of it based on how much like again from like the production side or maybe marketing. When marketing's emailing you asking you to do some stuff, you're like, "Oh, they're going to put some, they're going to push this one a little bit."
Right.
So sometimes that's it. But there's also been books that I've felt like have had like a ton of that sort of buzz and I've been like, "Oh, this is going to be huge." And then it didn't really do anything. And then I've had ones that like didn't do, they were kind of like a sleeper hit that, I was pleasantly surprised by like how popular it was or that I didn't know it was gonna. The biggest one with that was maybe you should talk to someone, which was like a nonfiction that I did a long time ago. Um, and it was kind of like a rushed project, which again, typically if it's, like when they have the ones that they're really putting a lot of hype into, you'll know about that one. And it ended up being like probably one of my most successful books. It was like, was like the audio edition itself was like on the New York Times top 10 for like the entire year. Like, and I was like, oh,
Oh, wow.
no idea that this was going to be this massive book. But so yeah, sometimes you are surprised.
Yeah. So, one of the because I guess again I mentioned that listener review for One Year Gone at the beginning. I had found some others when I was searching for them. I love this one I just had to write. It said woke propaganda and vulgar. I wish it was a requirement in the description that the author is pushing a certain agenda, which like it wasn't an agenda, just this one character happened to be a certain way. I'm sorry that you
Yeah.
didn't really agree with that. But then another one said, love the narrator. So I ordered this because there was nothing to read. So I searched for my favorite narrator, BP. She is the best. Like, at what point, I mean, I'm assuming you probably get emails occasionally or like messages on Instagram or wherever else. Like, at what point did things kind of start clicking where you're like, you realize you were starting to kind of gain um, a following in terms of listeners? Or maybe
Um,
you don't, because I feel like I've talked to some narrators who kind of are maybe too humble to really be like, we don't really, you know what I mean? Like, I don't know, but
yeah.
clearly you have fans. You have people who really oftentimes seek out stuff just because you narrate it.
Yeah, I still don't think about that. I don't know. I mean, I know that it's a thing. Um, and it's a cool thing.
Right, but was there a certain book where that, like, you mentioned that one nonfiction that was huge, like I remember, with Eduardo Ballerini, he had mentioned before the one Jess Walters book, the one set in Italy, like, just was like it just became huge, you know what I mean? And it was just one of those things that then he just kind of realized, kind of his career as a narrator really started to shift and became more well known, and probably could start, charging more per hour, that type of thing.
Yeah. I don't know that I had like I think it's just been like little things here and there. Like I don't feel like I've had like oh, this is what like solidified me. I feel like there's been, to me it's like I take so much from being asked back from an author asking me back. Like to me there's no greater like stamp of approval or whatever is to have an author want you to keep working with them. And I find that very validating. And you'll see yourself on little lists. It's hard. It's like you get wrapped up into it, and it can get in your head,
Yeah.
because then you pay too much attention to it because, then there's certain things where, there will be people who like you feel like they came out of nowhere and all of a sudden like they're getting all this attention and it can lend itself to, feelings of envy or less than and that kind of thing. So like always pleased if someone sends me a message on like Instagram or something and says they really like me, then I'm still very appreciative of that. That's
Yeah.
never like oh God, this is annoying. It's like I mean, I feel like you probably feel that way as an author. Like it's really cool. It's still
No,
really
it's
nice,
always, I mean, someone
you
takes the
know?
time to read or even like listen to the
Yeah,
audiobook. I mean, yeah, I mean, there are thousands of thousands of thousands of other choices out there. The fact that someone even takes,
absolutely.
a couple hours of their time to, of their life to just, devote
Yeah.
it to listening is always like, yeah, it's absolutely humbling. So, I don't want to keep you much longer. Just real quick, I imagine basically being a reader for your profession that you don't really probably have time or even want to then kind of do any like pleasure reading or listening to audiobooks or like or do you kind of find yourself like having, being able to kind of separate yourself and kind of stepping back and enjoying things, or now if you try to read or listen to audiobooks, is it kind of like in the back of your head you're kind of like seeing it as work?
I will say, so I don't read much for fun, like just on a day to day. I still love to, I mean, such a cliche, like I still love to sit on a beach and read a book though. So like if I'm on vacation or something, I will say the biggest thing with that is it has to be a book. Like it has to be, I have to hold a book in my hand. I want to hold it. I want to turn the pages. Um, and I find that very satisfying. Uh, because there's something about reading because when I'm recording I'm reading off a tablet and so it's
Yeah.
like I feel like my instinct is to like go quickly, so it's like there's something about holding a book in my hand and really turning those
What,
pages.
so was that always the case? Like when you started back in when you said, I think 2013, like when you started that, obviously I think there were, tablets and stuff back then, but I mean, were there ever times where you were just, they gave you an actual manuscript and you were doing like page by page?
Yes, the first handful of books that I did, they would mail me like the manuscript, like full printed out copies of the book. And um I think the very first one I recorded, I had them like thumbtacked up. I had like four pages thumbtacked at a time that I was like reading off of, and then I would like take them down and like four more.
Okay.
Um,
Because
or like,
I imagine it makes noise to
yeah,
like change the page or
yeah,
whatever.
yeah. So it's like they would have to edit that out. I was always told by engineers there's a narrator, Suzanne Torin, who's, I don't know if you're familiar with her. She's great, been doing it forever. And there was always like the legend of Suzanne because she could apparently like take a page and take it off and make no sound. So, but then we all got iPads and we didn't have to worry about that.
Yeah. Let me see if there's anything else. So is there any books that you have done recently or anything that you want to give shout outs to that, you want to make people aware of, or anything that's coming up in the next couple months that you've already recorded?
Well, I'm always very careful to not, alienate anyone. For
And
your
and you know what? Don't feel do not feel, we can talk about something else too. Actually, real
no,
quick,
no,
I
yeah,
what I'm thinking about, you mentioned some series. So when you were coming to a series, to like a book that you narrate a book one or book two in a series, and then obviously like a year or so goes by until you come back to that, and you've probably done dozens and dozens of other books. Then, I mean, do you keep like how do you keep track to make sure then? Because I know that some narrators basically then just find themselves going back and listening to the previous book, or like, do you keep notes, or like how do you make sure that then certain characters are still sounding like those characters from book to book?
yeah. So, sometimes it's notes. I am someone I don't like to mark up my scripts. That's something that I think is slightly different. I do like to have it on a separate like document. I just don't like the way it looks when there's like some people like highlight and do all this kind of stuff. I find that distracting. So I will, if I have a lot of notes to keep, I will keep them to the side. So sometimes I'll have that, but yeah, honestly, I laugh about how if anyone goes in my Audible, they're like, wow, this lady's full of herself. Her whole library is just her own books because it's like me downloading books to try to like listen to a character or something or find something. Um,
think Hillary had said, and just FYI, I think this might be helpful. She said that when she does those series books, she kind of keeps little audio files of those
yeah.
characters.
Yeah. So now, like, if I know something's going to be a series, I try to um, make sure that my engineer, I'm like, can you please mark all of these and create a little folder for me with these
Yeah,
characters so that I can easily pull them up in a year from now or whenever. Because
great.
it's easy for you to think like, oh, well, that was a year ago. No one's going to remember. But just because it came out a year ago doesn't mean they didn't listen to it yesterday.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of times people are listening to these series books back to back to back, and I'm sure it gets jarring. In fact, quite honestly, sometimes I find it jarring when, after 5 or 6 books, all of a sudden a new narrator kind of comes in. And
Yeah.
usually there's like a reason for that. Like, obviously the Reacher books, Dick Hill unfortunately passed away. So, well, no, he had retired, but I think he has since passed away. But there are some narrators who, for whatever reasons, they retire or they cannot continue it. And for listeners, like they're not really into the nitty gritty of the industry or like understand
Yeah.
why are there 3 different narrators for these 10 book series or,
Yeah. Yeah, I don't know because that happened to me. There was a book, there was like this series of books that I did probably like 20 of them or something. And then the rights holder changed and it went to a company that like I don't work for. Not like I don't work for them, but like I didn't have a working relationship with them. And I was pretty bummed that they didn't try to make one. They just hired someone else. And like also because the author thought I didn't want to do the books anymore. I was like, oh, I'm sorry you weren't available. And I was like, they didn't ask. I was available. I would have done them. But
yeah.
whatever, you
Well,
know.
we're kind of getting late on time, Brittany. I
Yeah.
appreciate you making time to hang out. If there, I don't know, was there anything else you wanted that we missed? I don't know, I don't know, like, is it nice to talk about being a narrator? Because I'm sure, because that's why I said like, and the reason I wanted to start chatting more with narrators because I feel like you guys, you're like unsung heroes. Like, people are obviously aware of your stuff, but you guys don't really kind of get the spotlight on you that much.
Yeah, I think it depends. Yeah, I mean it's interesting. Like there are some people who, like you said, they listen, they pay attention. They're like, oh, I'm going to buy this because of this person. And then there's other people that are just like fully oblivious to it. I was talking to a friend of my husband's friends who she's like a voracious audiobook listener, and like I was looking in her library and like I was like, oh yeah, like I know this, like it was either a book I had done or books that friends of mine have done. And but she had no, she's like, oh, I never pay attention to who it is. And I'm like, but you listened to the same voice from on like 7 different books. You didn't notice that it was the same person. But some people just aren't as like they
Have
don't.
you have you ever stumbled across a book that you forgot? I mean, I'm sure that there are some books, excuse me, that I'm sure you might run into this too. Man, I'm losing my voice. Are like, what do you do real quick? So, like, what do you do to make sure that you do not overextend your voice? Because obviously, if something happens to your voice, I mean, that costs you work for several days or longer.
I mean, I wish I had some like grand thing to say that I had some like, very, I feel like I see people that follow these like really like regimented, like I don't eat this, I don't eat this. I just try to drink water and get a decent night's sleep and try to avoid dairy during the recording session. That's
Yeah.
about it.
But does somebody ever come up to you and say, "Hey, I really liked your work on this book," and you're like, I don't, I have no recollection of ever even recording that book." I mean, several
Not,
hundred books in, I'm sure you
yeah.
can't remember every single book you've done.
Yes. I mean, I feel like one time my mom thought I was like being contrarian because she was like, that book. And I was like, well, which one was it? And she was like, well, it's like the woman and she kills her husband. And I was like, keep
You
going.
have to be a little bit more
Like,
specific.
and it's a small town. And I was like, keep going. I was like, I'm not trying to be difficult. I just like I need a couple of more things. And it was like, oh, and there's a reality. I'm like, oh, reality. Yes, okay, that one. So like sometimes I will the title or something, might not jog, but I pretty much I feel like I remember. There's never been a situation where I'm like, I have no memory of that.
Yeah.
Um, Stay with me.
Are you still doing those books under the pseudonym?
Yes. So like I just am finishing one. Lauren Blakely is a pretty popular author in that
Yeah.
genre. Just did some for her. And again, they're not particularly, like I said, most people start them to because they're doing things that are like more racy. Like they're not particularly racy books, but they are just like in that romance genre. And so she asked
Yeah.
for me under that name. So that's kind of how that
Yeah.
works.
It's great.
Um,
Well, again, Brittany, thank you so much for hanging out. Everyone go check out Brittany's all of her audiobooks. There's hundreds and hundreds on Audible. And you can track down the very first one she did. Again, what was the name of the very first one you did?
it was called Fated, like
Fated.
Fat. Yeah.
All right. Yeah. So again, Brittany, thank you so much for hanging out, and everybody, we'll see you next time.